Hi, folks. Today, on Grant Kerkhof's Learning Series, I will be discussing the history of the famous Union Pacific Challengers on my steam locomotive topics, and the most famous of them all, the Union Pacific 3985. Let's get to it. There it is, folks. It's the 3985. The soon-to-be second largest steam locomotive in operation in the United States after its restoration. It will soon be second in place alongside with the Big Boy 4014 as the second largest steam locomotive in the world. Remember the Union Pacific Big Boy locomotives as I told you before. With the 4884 wheel arrangement, they were at 132 feet long, and they weighed in at 1,200,200 pounds. They were the largest steam locomotives ever built in the U.S., but only 4014 is in operation today. The 3985, on the other hand, is small compared to the Big Boy locomotives. It is at 121 feet long and weighs in at 1 point. The 3985, on the other hand, is small compared to the Big Boy locomotives, much smaller in length, at 121 feet long, and it weighs in at 1,070,000 pounds and is standing at 16 feet high. Its 69-inch drive wheels and a 280 pounds per square inch boiler pressure, which means it can produce almost at 100,000 pounds of tractive effort at the rail. During its normal years of freight and passenger service, the 3985 can achieve a top speed of 80 miles per hour. The 3985 is one of the 105 steam locomotives with the 4664 wheel arrangement purchased by the Union Pacific Railroad. They were known as the Challenger class locomotives. The original 40 Challengers delivered to the Union Pacific were delivered in 1936 and 1937. They were different in appearance and design from the later series of the 3900 class, which the 3985 belongs to. The noticeable differences were the centered headlight and the smaller cab. The earlier series had 22-inch cylinders compared with the 3900 series' 21-inch, but both of them had 32-inch strokes. The earlier Challengers had a single smokestack, smaller sand domes, and as well as a smaller six-wheeled tender. The American Locomotive Company of Schenectady, New York, built the 105 Union Pacific Challengers. The 3985 was delivered to the Union Pacific in July of 1943 and is a representative of the heavier 3900 series of 4664s. Like the Big Boy 4014, the 3985 is an articulated locomotive. That means that the front engine unit and pilot are connected with a hinge pin that allows everything below the boiler on the front engine unit to operate freely. This allows the steam locomotive to negotiate tight curves. The 3985 operated its last final miles of revenue service in the late 1950s and was eventually retired in 1962. It was then stored in the Cheyenne Roundhouse alongside Big Boy number 4023. While the 4023 Big Boy was based in Omaha, Nebraska at the Western Heritage Museum, the 3985 was on display in Cheyenne at the Union Pacific parking lot adjacent to the depot. This move ultimately led to the return to operation as one of Union Pacific's famous examples of steam power. The 3985's restoration was completed in April of 1981, and in May of 1981, it then double-headed with its new stablemate, the legendary classic 484, the 844, which was renumbered the 8444 at the time. Over the next several years during the 1980s, the 3985 operated numerous excursions and other assignments, and it was originally a coal burner. But due to the dangers of showering the landscape with hot cinders from the firebox, it ignited numerous grass fires. During the 1980s, from 1982 to 1989, the 3985's operations were limited between Cheyenne and Laramie, Wyoming. In 1990, the 3985 was converted to burn No. 5 fuel oil, so it can utilize over the rest of the Union Pacific system. It did a test run to LaSalle, Colorado and back, with very successful results. In August of 1990, the 3985's new task came just a week later, when it was assigned the job of pulling a complete 143-car double-stack train for the American President's lines. History was made on that morning when over 8,000 feet of modern freight equipment was pulled unassisted by the huge Challenger between Cheyenne and North Platte, Nebraska. Later in September of 1990, the 3985 was called again to duty to pull the River City Roundup Special. Right behind the 3985 is a 460 locomotive or 460 steam locomotive, number 1243, riding along on a very special flat car, its own flat car. Built in 1890, it traveled alongside with the 844 during the 1990 season to celebrate its centennial celebration, and it has continued celebrating the same celebration with 3985. Then, a year later in 1991, the 3985 again teamed up with the 844. Together, they traveled to Sacramento, California to participate in Railfair 91. After the 1991 season, the overhaul of 844 was begun, and the 3985 was left in charge of pulling the excursion trains for the Union Pacific Steam program. Winter operations of old steam locomotives in the 1990s and today are rare. In November of 1992, the 3985 was honored the task of pulling a Santa Claus special for the CSX Railroad. The big 4664 demonstrated how impressive steam power can really be when the temperatures are low. Weeks later, the 3985 was masked as Clinchfield Railroad Challenger number 676 to pull the CSX Santa Claus special train from Memphis, Tennessee, all the way to Kingston, Kentucky. It's pretty quite a rare sight to see a 4664 Challenger locomotive operating in the eastern part of the United States. Then in 1993, the 3985 was honored another task to pull the Rocky Mountain Railroad Club excursion on the Sherman Hill, this time masquerading as sibling engine number 3967, which pulled the very first trip in 1957. Now, in 1993, 40 years later, the 3985 will follow the 3965's footsteps. Then in 1999, the 3985 once more teamed up with the 844, traveling to Sacramento, this time to participate in Railfair 99. After returning from California, trouble came along the way. The A44 broke down because of its tubes. The tubes have failed, which means the A44 couldn't move. So the 3985 was available to tow its companion back to Cheyenne. Now there's something you don't see every day. Well, not for once in a while. The 3985 teamed up with the largest diesel locomotive ever built, the DDA-40X 6936. Although both the 3985 and A44 were equipped with MU controls, MU means multiple unit, so that means the driver of either steam locomotive can control their diesel sidekicks from the cabs of the steam engines themselves. Modern diesel locomotives, however, can also join in, behind the old steamers. Then in 2005, after the A44's overhaul and repairs, the A44 is once more under steam and then teamed up with the 3985. In September of 2010, the 3985 was once again doing the honors of pulling another heavy train. And yet another memorable date was recorded. This time the 3985 pulled the Ringling Brothers Circus train from Cheyenne to Denver, Colorado. A month later in 2010, the 3985 A month later, in October of 2010, the 3985 operated its last final mile run, pulling its excursion trains, and was eventually sidelined for another overhaul. But there was a problem. The 3985's mechanical condition is poor, so the Union Pacific steam crew decided to retire it. This move eventually led to the restoration of 4014 Big Boy and the donation of 3985 to Silvis, Illinois. So here is the 3985 in the Silvis, Illinois shops, the railroading heritage of Midwest America's shops, where it is now undergoing a second restoration. As of today, its restoration is still gaining a steady progress, but soon the 3985 will be up and running on the rails once again. And this time it will join its new stablemate, the Milwaukee Road 261, which the RRHMA also owns, and alongside the 5511, and including the largest diesel locomotive, the 6936. Well, this is all I got for you guys about the Union Pacific Challengers and the 3985. I hope you all enjoyed this video. Make sure you smash that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the notification bell, and I'll talk to you next time. Goodbye!